Hello, my name is Rand, and today we're going to do 5 tips on how to create gods. These tips come from my book, 185 Tips on Worldbuilding, which you can get an ebook copy of for free by looking in the video description and clicking the appropriate link. There are also other freebies down there, so feel free to look around. Tip number 1, decide whether or not you need them. If you have a religious character, then you probably do. However, if you don't, and you don't plan on using religion in any significant way, then you may not. Also, if you are doing a short story or just a single novel, then you may have one god, or you could have a pantheon, but even if you have that pantheon, you don't necessarily need to create all of the gods. I have a book that will be coming out next year called The Dragon Gate, and at some point in the narrative I said there was something like 12 gods for the elves, 5 for the humans, and maybe 9 for the dwarves. And I read that book this other day because I wrote it about 10 years ago, and I thought, as I read that, I started to laugh because I thought, no, I don't have any of those gods. I only made up one because one of the characters needs to have a god to pray to, and that was it. So I didn't really need to invent all those other gods, and I hardly did any details on the one that I did invent. So do you need to invent them or not? Well, it's going to be up to you, but don't do them if you don't need them. Tip number 2 is that science does not eliminate religion. This is a theory that some people have, but it's not really accurate. On Earth, we have all sorts of scientific accomplishments, but some of our greatest scientists still believe in religion and are in fact very religious. So in science fiction, we might think, okay, there's not going to be any religion, but that's not going to be true. Science sometimes explains things, but that doesn't mean that the belief that existed before necessarily goes away. Some people still just want to believe in a higher being. If you find these videos helpful, I would love some support on Patreon so that I can continue making them for you. Please look in the video description for the link and check out all the goodies I have for supporters. And if you already contribute, you are awesome and thank you very much. Tip number 3 is to decide if the gods are real or not. In fantasy, they are often depicted as being real, and often they put in appearances, so that's an easy one. But in science fiction, this does seem to come up less. If they do appear, we need to decide if they have rules for how they engage or whether they engage at all. If they do interact with people, we should decide on if there have been any infamous incidents in the past or ones that are going to occur during our story, or maybe in the future there is some sort of incident that is expected, maybe one that is heralding the end of the world. Now, if the gods are not real, that doesn't mean that people will not invent them anyway. And I don't want to insult anyone's religions, but in the past there have been many religions with people believing in gods, and today many of those religions are not considered to be about real gods. We consider someone like Thor to be made up. No offense to anyone who still believes in Thor. But you get the idea. Basically, people are going to believe in higher beings, whether they are real or not. So it's up to us to decide, is there an advantage to us to make them real? And usually that advantage is they show up and they impact events. So if you don't need that, then maybe they aren't real. Tip number 4 is that we can reuse the gods. One of the ways this comes up is if we are creating a multi-use world where we could set several novels there that have nothing to do with each other, or maybe they do, but basically we're going to reuse that setting. Now, we might need to create a set of characters in one kingdom for the first book, and then another set of characters in a kingdom for the other book, but we could have the gods essentially be the same if the gods are associated with the entire planet, or even just this region. On Earth, we had different mythologies based on different areas like Egypt or the Norse mythology or the Greeks. So it's not necessarily true that the gods could be for the whole world, but on the other hand, the one God of Christianity is seen as a worldwide God at this point. And it wasn't always that way, but this is something we can do where we don't necessarily have to keep recreating gods. The other way that we can reuse gods is that a lot of mythologies are going to have a similar god. For example, many of them will have a god of war. Not all of them, but we could end up creating 10 gods of war during our career. Maybe what we should do is create one sort of prototype god of war, and then for each setting that we create, we change their preferred weapon. We obviously change their name. We change little things about them, but basically we have one god of war who's going to come up in different stories. Now, if we have a god of war come up in every story, that may not be the best thing because it looks like we're kind of following a formula, but you get the idea. If I have to create multiple worlds, I might just take my giant list of gods that I've created and say, I'm going to take one of these, one of those, one of these, and just pick them apart, take them for what they are worth, and recombine them into a new thing, give them new names, change subtle details. And basically what we're doing is we're kind of doing an analog based on our own work. An analog is when we take something from Earth and we modify it, like taking the god of thunder, Thor, from the Norse mythology. Maybe we have our own version of this. Well, if we've made up, let's say, 30 god types over the course of our career, or at the start of our career, and we're grabbing that god of war yet again, we're taking our own idea and we're taking another version of that and just creating different versions of it for the work that we have in mind at this time. Tip number 5 is to use analogs. I just mentioned Thor. Well, why not create a god who is just like him? But of course we're going to change his name, and we're not going to use the hammer because that's too similar to what he was doing. Remember my rule of 3 if you watch the analogs video. We want to make 3 significant changes to our analogs so that people don't recognize it. But one of the great things about analogs is that we can start with something that we already know and like and just change the details to make it our own. And it spares us having to start from scratch. We can just get ideas on gods by checking out many of the mythologies that are here on Earth and choosing ones that we like. These tips are based on a chapter from Creating Life, and here is a summary of that chapter's contents. Summary of Chapter 2, Creating Gods. Our species will invent gods to believe in, even if we don't invent them. So we may need some deities for people to reference in dialogue, whether praying or swearing. In science fiction, belief in gods may still exist, despite or even because of advances in science. In fantasy, priests often call on a god to heal someone, and this requires having invented the gods. Pantheons offer advantages over a lone god, including dynamic relationships between them and the species. Half-gods and demigods are other options that help us create myths and legends to enrich our world, especially if gods can be born, die, or be visited in their realm. Myths about how the gods or species came to exist help people understand the purpose of their lives and what awaits them in death. Symbols, appearance, patronage, and willingness to impact the lives of their species all color a pantheon and world. Gods also create places people can visit or items that can fall into the wrong hands, offering possibilities for stories. Okay, that's all for these tips. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to see more. While these tips come from 185 Tips on World Building, that book is based on my 3-volume series, The Art of World Building, and these tips come from Volume 1, which is Creating Life. There's more information in the video description. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. By the way, if you'd like more stuff to help with world building, my artofworldbuilding.com site has a bunch of free templates that you can download by joining the mailing list. You can click the link in the episode description or the little information button in the upper right-hand corner. There are over 20 of these templates, as you can see from this list. Most of them are Microsoft Word documents, but the 2 calculator ones, which come from my Creating Places book, are Excel spreadsheets that take care of the math for you. You can just type in measurements from a map and find out how long it takes to go somewhere by dragon, wagon, foot, or even ships. If you're enjoying the video, remember to click the like button and subscribe.